Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. I'm Reed Cowan. President Joe Biden speaking out for the first time since his former opponent was reelected to office for a second term in the White House. Mr. Biden echoing Vice President Kamala Harris's call for a peaceful transition of power. We wanted to bring you some of those remarks. Listen.
The soul of America, since our very founding, has always been an ongoing debate and still vital today. I know for some people, it's a time for victory, to state the obvious. For others, it's a time of loss. Campaigns are contests of competing visions. The country chooses one or the other. We accept the choice the country made. I've said many times, you can't love your country only when you win. You can't love your neighbor only when you agree. Something I hope we can do, no matter who you voted for, is see each other not as adversaries, but as fellow Americans. Bring down the temperature.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes joins us now for more. Nancy, can we expect this to be the president's message until Trump takes over the White House in January? Is this it?
Well, it's his message right now, Reed, but I think it's hard to imagine that the very magnanimous way that he's speaking right now isn't going to change as the Trump team says and does some things that inevitably this White House is going to find frustrating, if not maddening. For example, the transition period begins now. President Biden has already invited the president-elect here to the White House. He has said that he will do anything that needs to be done to aid with the transition. But, if past is prologue, these two teams are inevitably going to butt heads. There are going to be things that the Trump team wants to do that the Biden team does not want to facilitate. And I anticipate that, that as we start to hear more about the people, for example, that the president-elect wants to put in positions of power, wants to install in his cabinet, I think it's likely that we're going to hear some sharper criticism from the president of the United States.
If those walls could talk, and if you could hear in on the conversation, the president also said he spoke to Trump yesterday following that victory. Stay with us. We're going to ask you about this on the other side. Let's listen right now.
The people vote and choose their own leaders, and they do it peacefully. And we're in a democracy. The will of the people always prevails. Yesterday, I spoke with President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory. And I assured him that I'd direct my entire administration to work with his team to ensure a peaceful and orderly transition. That's what the American people deserve.
So, Nancy, a part of this is election certification. What role does the White House have in that, in being a part of a smooth transition?
The White House itself has very little role in that. That's controlled by Congress. We don't anticipate that Democrats are going to interfere with that process in any way, unlike what we saw from Republicans 4 years ago. In fact, Democrats have been very clear that they're not trying to contest the outcome of this election, that they believe that this was a free and fair election. And the president himself, in his speech in the Rose Garden, made a point of saying, hopefully this will put to rest this notion that somehow our elections are fraudulent and that elections workers are anything other than hardworking, patriotic individuals. He's trying to make a point. Hey, look, when Democrats lose, we say it's a loss fair and square, and that is what Republicans should do in the future if and when they don't like the outcome.
Nancy Cordes, always great talking to you there from our nation's capital or anywhere else. I sure hope you get some rest this weekend. You certainly deserve it, as do all of our CBS News peers. Take care, Nancy. President-elect Donald Trump already planning on filling his cabinet and nearly 4,000 other government jobs, all with marching orders to do exactly what Trump says to achieve his vision. So let's bring in CBS News campaign reporter Jake Rosen. Jake, we know the transition plans have really been in the works since even before the election. So what's next? Do you have any names to float from Team Trump? All right, Jake, I don't think Jake is able to hear us right now. We'll try to go back to Jake. Some technical issues here, and that's when you earn your paycheck, when you just roll with things. So let's roll on ahead. Some of President-elect Donald Trump's mounting legal battles may be coming to an end. We're talking specifically about special counsel Jack Smith. He's looking now to wind down the ongoing federal prosecutions against the president-elect. The move prompted by a long-standing policy that forbids prosecuting a sitting president. The Jack Smith is currently overseeing 2 cases against Donald Trump, the first for conspiring to overturn the 2020 election, the second involving the much-talked-about classified documents case out of Mar-a-Lago. CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman is here and has the very latest developments on this. Katrina, thanks for joining us here, rolling with us through some of our technical issues right now. Help us to understand that long-standing policy and what happens next. Does this just literally all go away?
Hi, Reed. So this is a DOJ policy that comes out of a 2000 memo affirming a policy from the Watergate era. And it's believed that it just puts too much of an undue burden on the president to be undergoing a prosecution. It's viewed as unconstitutional to let this proceed. So Jack Smith is looking into how to wind down these cases. And the Florida one is more complicated than the one in D.C. because that's not only against former President Donald Trump. There are 2 other defendants in that case. And further complicating it, Reed, is that there's an appeal going on to the 11th Circuit, and it's on the basis of whether or not the appointment and funding of the special counsel is unconstitutional. So Jack Smith will really have to think through how to proceed with this because there are other issues at play in those cases.
Right, and let's talk about the hush money case out of New York. Trump was already found guilty on 34 counts of falsifying business records. Sentencing has been delayed twice. Will the judge now go forward with that sentencing as scheduled now that Trump has won the White House?
There is a lot on Judge Juan Merchan's plate right now. For one, we're also waiting for a decision from him on whether the Supreme Court's presidential immunity ruling will warrant dismissing this case altogether. And then, depending on what he decides with that, we do have this sentencing currently set at the end of the month. Merchan will have to decide if he wants to proceed with that, if he wants to move it until after the presidency. I've also heard talk that Trump's team is just going to try to get this case dismissed altogether now that he has been elected president. So I will absolutely be watching that case in the coming days.
Wow. We know you'll keep us posted. CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman, thank you so much. Elections workers still counting ballots, causing Democrats and Republicans to really hold their breath. Why? Well, this is the big question. Will the U.S. House have a Republican majority? We're looking at that. It is looking that way for Republicans. But when we come back, we'll watch that part of elections coverage 2024. Welcome back, everybody. After the transition of power, President-elect Donald Trump says he will waste no time delivering on the promises he made during his campaign, especially when it comes to immigration and his plan to launch the largest deportation operation in U.S. history. Right now, there are at least 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. That's according to the American Immigration Council. So deporting 1 million people a year would take 1,000 new courtrooms to process and cost taxpayers an estimated $88 billion. That's roughly 11 times the size of ICE's entire annual budget. So the question is, what will immigration reform that Trump promised look like? CBS News immigration reporter Camila Montoya Galvez breaks down Trump's immigration policy plans from the U.S. and Mexico border in Arizona.
President-elect Trump made immigration and the U.S.-Mexico border defining issues in this presidential campaign, and he is promising a radical shift in policy here at the border by deploying the military to arrest and detain migrants, by overseeing the largest deportation operation in American history, and by reinstating policies like the Remain in Mexico asylum program that requires migrants to await their cases on the other side of this border. And he is also promising major changes to legal immigration by suspending refugee refugee admissions and reinstating and expanding that infamous travel ban that mostly affected Muslim-majority countries. And unlike 2016, his incoming administration believes that the public is behind them on the issue of immigration. Poll after poll has shown an increased support for restrictive immigration policies, including that mass deportation promise. Camila Montoya Galvez, CBS News, Nogales, Arizona.
Let's go to Southern California. Several people injured, multiple homes destroyed after this. Look at the fire there. This fire exploded in Ventura County outside of Los Angeles, and the video just tells the story. The fire is a monster. It's big because of big winds. Officials moments ago gave us an update on the so-named mountain fire. Listen.
As you all are well aware, at 9 o'clock approximately yesterday morning, resources responded to a wildland fire that is now the mountain incident. That was north of Highway 118 due to the Santa Ana wind event impacting Southern California currently. The fire grew rapidly to that number that our PIO just spoke about, over 14,000 acres now on the landscape. Firefighters, again, were initially engaged in structure defense, life safety operations, and performing nothing short of heroic actions across the incident. Fire continued to progress to the southwest throughout yesterday and into last night. Again, we had resources engaged throughout the evening. Last night, we had water dropping helicopters over the fire the entire evening, which is irregular for any type of wildland incident, but we were able to capture that. Resources are actively engaged around the incident at this current time. Due to the influx of resources into the incident, we built a more robust incident management structure out there operationally. Resources are engaged, engines, crews, dozers. We currently have aerial supervision over the fire using a rotor wing and assessing for fixed wing operations to slow the spread of the fire. Crews are reevaluating and going back through areas where the fire's already passed and making sure that we've done a good assessment and we're checking on everybody, and we're going to have an active presence in there for days to come. Our priority right now on the fire is the northeast corner of the fire.
So, translation, firefighters literally giving that fire hell. It's burning to the city of Oxnard, 65 miles east of Los Angeles. You can see on the map there. CBS News correspondent Jonathan Vigliotti joins us live just south of the mountain fire in Camarillo, California. Jonathan, the video of the gutted homes is just heartbreaking in the night, but now we can see it from the vantage point where you are during the daytime. What a tragedy.
And Reed, the wind here has really been the biggest threat. We're talking wind gusts exceeding 80 miles per hour at times. When you add that to flames, you essentially have a blowtorch effect, and you can see the impact that it's had on homes like this one, a total loss. This family actually just coming back for the first time to inspect what little is left. If we cross the street over here, another home that's been leveled. I actually spoke with the homeowners when they returned. They said they got no emergency evacuation orders because the power was out, the cell service was down. They literally fled as the fire was barreling down with only their clothes and their cat, returning home to a neighborhood. When you look down here, we're talking easily dozens of homes have been destroyed. To give you some perspective, this fire actually started yesterday morning about 20 miles from where we're standing. The wind was so strong, it led to a rapid explosion of this fire in just a matter of hours. 14,000 acres. Officials saying that at times the embers from that source fire were blown more than 2.5 miles away, sparking more fires, leading to essentially a hopscotch effect around the area. You have fire crews that are here in this neighborhood. Their biggest concern right now, the hot spots here reigniting. Their efforts have been hampered by this wind. You do have some Chinook helicopters that are up. They're conducting those aerial drops, but what we are not seeing at this hour are the major aircrafts, the air tankers that come in to do their work because the wind has led to them being grounded. At last count, about 3,500 homes are being threatened right now by this fire, which continues to grow out of control. Thousands of people under a mandatory evacuation order, and we're being told that could continue to grow as the threat grows. And when you look over here, you can see some of the helicopters perhaps in the distance. Just in the past hour, the wind has picked up. You see the smoke now starting to pick up. This fire 0% contained as fire crews desperately trying to get the upper hand here. The biggest concern right now at this hour is a repeat of what happened yesterday happening again today, Reed.
Jonathan Vigliotti live from the mountain fire. Such devastation. Our thoughts with so many people who have lost so much and are still at risk of losing everything. Thank you so much for that. You know who's watching the information that comes from meteorologist Jessica Birch. Jess, show us some of the images that you're looking at right now to try to gauge the wind that we could hear in Jonathan Vigliotti's live report there.
Absolutely. Let's start off with what's happening right now, showing that surface smoke, that mountain fire currently at 14,000 acres. We saw wind gust at those peak levels anywhere up to around 80 miles per hour. As mentioned, 1,000 people more are still evacuated right now, and there's 0% of containment. There's red flag warnings in effect. There's wind warnings in effect widespread throughout that region, and we continue to keep a close eye on the air quality heading into the coming days. Now, Futurecast wind gusts right now showing about a max sustained wind close to around 30 miles per hour pushing offshore, but that's closer to areas like Thousand Oaks and Santa Clarita. Now, into the overnight hours tonight, we'll continue to monitor those peak levels. That's where that vegetation is at its most. And changing gears real fast, I want to show you also what's happening over into the Rockies, because Colorado has been receiving some heavy extreme weather recently. So far, we've seen over 32 inches of snow in certain pockets of the Colorado Rockies, and we continue to watch the front end of that storm system move throughout Texas, Oklahoma, stretching up into Kansas into the evening hours tonight, early morning hours tomorrow as we head into our weekend forecast. Our severe weather outlook today showing a slight risk throughout southern portions, or at least western portions of Texas, and that means that we could see a tornado threat. We could potentially see damaging wind throughout that region in San Angelo, all the way up into areas like Lubbock too. Large hail is possible with this exact same system. One more thing that we need to talk about also down into the south now, Tampa Bay stretching down into the Keys, dealing with some active storms as Hurricane Rafael is just to the west of Florida. Now this will continue to track to the west, dying down into a Category 1 into Friday morning, early Saturday morning. It still stays at a Category 1, not impacting inland areas at that time. We'll have more on that coming up in a bit. We'll continue to keep a close eye on that smoke, the air quality, and of course the fire burning in Southern California. For now, back to you.
Jess, thank you for that. Well, talk of the presidential election red hot the day after the results came in, and nowhere more than in the Middle East and Ukraine. How the election of Donald Trump lands on the ears of those who live in war zones when we come back. President-elect Donald Trump already planning filling his cabinet nearly 4,000 other government jobs, all with marching orders to accomplish the Trump plan. So let's bring in CBS News campaign reporter Jake Rosen. Jake, we know the transition plans have been in the works since even before the election. So this is the question I wanted to ask you. What is next? And do you have any names that people are talking about as potential people to sort of fill up the Trump ship, so to speak?
Well, we know that there are meetings underway right behind me down at Mar-a-Lago here in West Palm Beach. People like Michael Whatley, who I spotted earlier today, said that he was going to go down to Mar-a-Lago and meet with the former president. In addition to other people who are just generally in the Trump aura right now, is that people like Senator Marco Rubio and people like Vivek Ramaswamy, who have been stumping for the former president, have not denied and said they don't want to be a part of a Trump administration in the future, or people who Trump has said implicitly on the campaign trail to reporters and in interviews that he wants with him on his new team, like people like Elon Musk, whether in an official or unofficial role, people like Robert F. Kennedy, who seems to be telling other people, including the media, that and publicly, that he is going to have some kind of more official role in a future Trump administration. Yet to be determined. We're only 48 hours out from really the election, but these transition efforts are underway down here in West Palm Beach in terms of what Trump is doing with his advisors to choose a next chief of staff, next cabinet officials, and again, thousands of other people who he will have to appoint when he officially becomes president.
Yeah, Jake, it's interesting that you mentioned Marco Rubio, because I've seen some of his interviews today talking about deportation. So let's talk about that policy. Team Trump has talked deportations and mass deportations at that since really not long after launching for the presidency. So when he gets in, who gets deported first? And can the administration really deport all of the people that have been promised as being booted out of the country? How does that work?
So we only have the details that former President Trump has talked about in interviews with CBS and on the campaign trail and in questions that me and my colleagues have asked him. He said that he wants to start with about 1 million people first. J.D. Vance has echoed that. They said that they want local police and state law enforcement to flag somehow to the federal government who these people are and to work on deporting them and to give these offices the resources to do so. Now, that's, again, unclear about how specifically that all happens, in addition to other immigration policies, like instituting new policies and punishments for migrants who hurt American citizens, that would have to be actually passed in Congress, right, on a federal level. So a lot of these things are kind of in flux, although we know Trump and his advisors have been touting this as why they won, why the American people voted overwhelmingly for him in this election, and Donald Trump will have to deliver on it. He's talked a lot on the campaign trail about instituting a lot of executive orders on things like the border wall and funding border agents too, something that his administration did the first time and then President Biden undid. So we'll see as the kind of weeks and months go on about exactly what happens in that space.
All right, Jake, so I have another thing I want to ask you about, a headline that just came out into the zeitgeist, so to speak, from California. That state's governor, Gavin Newsom, calling for a special session, he says, to protect the state's policies from what he is calling, and these are his words, statements and proposals put forward by President-elect Trump and his advisors, close quote. So how have Democrats really framed a future Trump administration, and what's the GOP saying about that in terms of transition?
Well, while the word Project 2025 has really not been thrown around a lot in the last week until after the election, and it's something that Democrats went into the DNC framing Republican policy as an extreme handbook of ideas that was co-signed by a Republican think tank, the Heritage Foundation. That is probably what they're alluding to there, some more extreme policies than even what Donald Trump and his advisors have. But a lot of those people who might be on these transition lists, who were in a first Trump administration, were a part of that. The Trump administration says that they want nothing to do with that they have no interest in even hiring some of these heritage people who were part of that, building that book in that space. We'll have to see, again, exactly what happens. But a lot of the ideas in that book, mass deportations, things on abortion, restricting abortion access across the country, restricting IVF access, which Donald Trump has had to push back against, all of those things are in that book, and you can see Democrats already kind of pushing that agenda again, reminding their supporters about what is at stake in the next 2 or 3 months in terms of protecting what they can, especially at the state's level, before Donald Trump gets into the White House.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jake, to see Gavin Newsom stepping forward in such a bold way, calling that special session, because it has been said by a lot of people, especially in the state of California, that Newsom has designs on the presidency. As Democrats consider their way forward in the future, Gavin Newsom is a name a lot of people keep seeing. Jake Rosen reporting live. Thank you so much. So America decides, but what's the decision? We're talking about this. Elections workers still counting ballots, and that means several key congressional races are still uncalled in both the House and the Senate. And that means the question of which party controls Congress looms large. So here's where we are. CBS News characterizing control of the House as leaning Republican. In the Senate, Republicans projected to win control. So let's go live to CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian. Nicole, let's start in the Senate. This was a really key flip for Trump headed into the elections. How much support will the president-elect have in the Senate?
Yeah, well, for many, this seemed inevitable because Democrats really had a tough map to defend this cycle. But certainly having a majority in the Senate now will make the former president, or now president-elect's job much easier in terms of trying to advance his agenda. Of course, we're still waiting on the results of the House. But as you mentioned, as of now, it appears to lean Republican. So if the president-elect gets that trifecta, expect a very robust legislative agenda to move very quickly from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue here into Capitol Hill.
In the air, Democrats holding out hope for the House. Explain for our viewers why the House is so important for Democrats.
Well, look, I mean, the House is important to both parties. I mean, to be quite frank, House Republicans had a call not too long ago with the NRCC, which is the campaign arm for House Republicans, and they still feel extremely confident that they will retain the majority. About 205 seats have already been called in the House, and they believe that they can reach that magic number of 218 to get the majority that they need, even if it's a narrow one. House Democrats, for their part, though, are also holding a call, held one not too long ago as well. This was really the first time that Democrats have had a chance to caucus since the outcome of the election. And look, some members of leadership have acknowledged that in spite of some of the frustration and disappointment they may feel because of the outcome, that members of leadership are ready to stand in to try to help course correct going forward. So that was some of the dialogue and discussion that was had had, but certainly Democrats, it would be in their interest, of course, to try to flip the majority if they can, not only for historical purposes in the sense that that would catapult Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries to become the first black Speaker of the House, but also it would kind of give that checks and balance against Republicans, against the president-elect, against a Republican Senate if needed. But again, right now, a lot of these races are still too close to call to know which way this will ultimately land.
Well, we see the graphic there on the screen, which takes us to our next question. The GOP is searching for the next Senate leader. Talk to us about the future of Mitch McConnell and the search to replace him.
Well, as you know, earlier this year, Mitch McConnell made the decision that he would step aside from leadership, even though he would serve out the remainder of his term through 2026. So a lot of jockeying has been underway for several months now to replace him, but that is really ramping up in earnest now that those leadership elections will be taking place very soon. So you have the Johns, which is Senator John Thune, Senator John Cornyn among the top contenders. Also, Florida Senator Rick Scott trying to make a bid for this position as well. Keep in mind, though, of course, with the president-elect focused on his transition, I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to, weigh in on this in a way. And certainly many of those jockeying for this position are trying to show how aligned they are with the former president to kind of up their chances of potentially being elected the next Senate Majority Leader.
The balance of power, all caps power. Nicole Killian, thank you so much. Well, the mastermind in the 9/11 terror attacks awaiting his fate. When we come back, why a plea deal angers families of victims, and we're going to talk about the legal wranglings behind the scenes. Live with CBS News, Charlie D'Agata. Stay with us. All eyes on the White House today in the press briefing room as President Joe Biden addressed the nation earlier today on the results of the presidential race. His core message, a peaceful power of transfer. Well, you're looking right there at that podium because Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre is expected to give a briefing any moment now, taking questions from reporters. As soon as she steps in front of that microphone, we will bring it to you. Of course, when we see it, you see it right here on CBS News 24/7. So a defense official confirming to CBS News the death penalty may be off the table for the alleged mastermind behind 9/11. So this comes after a military judge overruled Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's attempt to throw out plea agreements that would spare the lives of the defendants in exchange for guilty pleas. So CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata is joining us now on the stream. Charlie, walk us through what this means for the case.
Well, first of all, Reed, it means the plea deal is back on the table for the defendants of the 9/11 attacks. So a defense official, as you said, confirmed to us earlier today. So the military judge overruled a decision that was made by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin back in July that the plea deals could be made in exchange for the death penalty. Now, at the time, and we covered that, he said that a decision of that magnitude, because there's so much riding on it, could only be made by himself. And it would have seen mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and two other co-defendants avoiding the risk of the death penalty. And this was kind of like a done deal. So prosecutors and defense attorneys had worked it out in Guantanamo Bay where they're being held. It was approved. But when Austin found out about it, he quickly nullified the decision. The military judge is still presiding over the case. And according to defense officials we spoke to, he said Austin was just too late in that decision. And even at the time, questions were raised whether it was even under his legal jurisdiction to do that anyway.
Well, speaking of Austin, Secretary of Defense Austin had a message for the U.S. military following President-elect Donald Trump's victory. What can you tell us about what was in a very specific memo from Mr. Austin?
Yeah, so U.S. defense officials I just spoke to said the defense secretary sent that memo out calling for a calm, orderly, and professional transition to the incoming administration. So it was addressed to the entire Defense Department personnel, civilian staff, uniformed service members alike. He said they swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and that is precisely what they will do. This is a direct quote. You're not just any military, you're the United States military, the finest fighting force on earth. You'll continue to defend our country, our Constitution, and the rights of all our citizens. Now, we remember the not-so-peaceful transfer of power on January 6th. So this is really something of a pep talk to people in this building and people in uniform, but also there to reinforce that message that the military stands apart from politics. During his campaign, you may remember President-elect Trump said that we're dealing with the military as facing an enemy within. But Austin said they stand ready to carry out the lawful orders of the incoming Trump administration.
Calm, orderly, and professional. I'm going to hold my kids to that standard, and thank you for being an example of that day in and day out. Charlie D'Agata, thank you so much for being with us. Meanwhile, President-elect Donald Trump already working the phones with world leaders. First up, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu's office says Donald Trump called him to vow to work with him in Israel's fight against Hamas and Hezbollah. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams live for us in Tel Aviv. We wanted to tell our viewers we're on about a 4-second delay, my voice to Holly's voice. But question for you, Holly, do we know the fullness of what was said and promised on that call?
Reid, look, we don't have a lot of details, although Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was clearly delighted that he was one of the first world leaders that President-elect Donald Trump spoke to after his victory. The Prime Minister's office here said that the two discussed the, quote, Iranian threat. Now, that is a reference to the shadow war that has long been fought in this region between Iran and Israel, that in recent months has come out into the open, with both sides directly targeting each other with strikes. The U.S. is very worried that it could widen the conflict here in the Middle East even further. Before the phone call, Netanyahu, in a statement, congratulated Donald Trump in extremely enthusiastic terms, saying that his win was, quote, history's greatest comeback. Now, Trump, as you know, was a staunch supporter of Israel during his first term in office. And here in Israel, just a few days before the U.S. election, a poll found that 66% of Israelis wanted Donald Trump to win. Only 17% were supporting Vice President Kamala Harris.
So Benjamin Netanyahu must feel some sense of power. Given these new developments, he's digging in his heels. We do know he fired Yoav Gallant. So a big question, will a Trump presidency do anything to end the war, or do we expect a deepening of these conflicts now that he has that confidence?
Yeah, look, such an interesting question, Reid. Trump said repeatedly during the campaign that he wanted the war in Gaza to finish, but he didn't really give any details about how that could or should happen.
Right.
So we don't really know what might happen in concrete terms. But there have been increasing signs of strain between Netanyahu and the Biden administration over the war in Gaza, in particular the civilian death toll. The Hamas-run health ministry says that more than 43,000 people have been killed during the war in Gaza, and the dire humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. But, you know, despite criticism from overseas, including from the US and even here in Israel, Netanyahu does seem determined to push on with the war and achieve his stated goals of destroying Hamas. On Tuesday, as you pointed out, even firing his own defense minister, in part over disagreements they had about what the goals of the war should be. Reid.
Holly, thank you so much for that live report from the Middle East. Be well, be safe. Thank you. We're awaiting a possible big decision by the Federal Reserve when it comes to your money. Economists expect the Fed to shave a quarter point off of interest rates. So this would be the second cut this year, and 2 months after the first one made in September. So if it happens, rates will go down to a range of about 4.5% to 4.75%. So we are watching the reaction to the Dow right now. There's the big board. Of course, we'll be watching that throughout the day as we get closer to Wall Street closing up. From the big board to the person with the big mind to explain it, CBS News business analyst Jill Schlesinger, you're helping to break it all down. What does this decision mean to our wallets, Jill?
You know, whenever the Fed makes a decision, it really does impact everybody. So most of us are either borrowers or savers. So if you're a borrower and the interest rates drop a bit, then you might see some relief when you go out to borrow money. So maybe a new car purchase or a used car purchase, or maybe it's an outstanding balance on a credit card. And yes, the interest rate is really high, but it'll come down a little bit. If you're a saver, you're not so happy when the Fed cuts interest rates because all of a sudden the interest rate you get on a savings account or a short-term CD or even a money market account, that interest rate will also go down. So that's where you feel it most specifically, borrowing and saving.
All right, so let's talk about inflation. Where is it headed? We know those recent inflation readings show that we're getting closer to the Fed's 2% target. That's the thing that they wanted to hit all this while. But is there a cause for concern about that core inflation ticking up a little bit?
So, okay, that core inflation is when we pull out food and energy, or as my friends like to say, oh, the only things I care about? Yes. And the core reading remains high because the cost of housing is high. So this is probably a lagging indicator, meaning that people don't renew their leases all at the same time, all the time. So we know that rents, year-over-year increases for rents across the country have been moving a little bit lower, so that's the good news. The bad news is that housing still eats up a big chunk of a family's budget. And I think that when we see that core rate tick up a little bit, it usually is because that housing part has not been pushed down. The Fed is looking through that. The Fed believes it's on track. But of course, the big unknown and the elephant in the room is that if there are tariffs that are actually enacted next year under the next Trump administration, it could push inflation rates higher. And in that case, the Fed may not be moving down a quarter point at every single meeting. They might kind of hold their horses and wait to see whether inflation, both the headline inflation and core inflation, whether they come down enough so that they can keep cutting.
Yeah, tariff talking causing a lot of people to talk today. So let's drill down on that. It's been a big week. New president just elected. Does the election result really lead to economic demand for inflation, or will this call for a different policy path?
I think the Fed's really going to be interested in seeing whether or not the Trump administration, or Trump administration number 2, is going to push these tariffs in the way that they did on the campaign trail. You know, now we're starting to see some of the folks inside of the transition team saying, oh, well, maybe it's just a starting point for a negotiation. But make no mistake, the Federal Reserve has a very specific job to maintain an interest rate that will allow the inflation rate come down to its target of around 2%, but also to make sure that the labor market is strong enough so that anyone who wants a job can get a job. If any part of the Trump administration's plans cause them to weigh one versus the other, they're going to shift their own policy. Monetary policy will shift. And right now, what we know about what has been said on the trail is that the Trump administration wants to fuel growth. Growth can often lead to inflation. Tariffs can lead to inflation, so we'll have to see what we end up with.
We await and we watch, but we know we've got you in our corner to explain it all. Jill Schlesinger, thank you so much. Nice to have this conversation with you. When we come back on CBS News 24/7, we take you out west to a major murder trial. A tech consultant accused of murdering a tech executive. Now it looks like that consultant wants to tell his side of the story to jurors. More on the murder trial against Nemo Momeni in the death of Bob Lee. Looking live at a little place called Denver, Colorado. Snow shovels coming out today, right out of the storage units. A snowstorm moved through that state, leaving behind the first official snow of the winter season. This was what happened yesterday, and it's still going on. You can see the white stuff still coming down. So far, 5 inches to more than a foot in some spots. More snow expected tomorrow. It's a similar scene in beautiful New Mexico. Look at that. The first flakes of the season fell on Santa Fe this week. The community there braces for more winter weather to arrive with the possibility of several inches of snowfall and a test of generations. Jess, if I say this reminds me of Burl Ives, what do you think?
Oh my goodness. Well, I will say this, the National Weather Service is keeping a very close eye on these areas because not only are we dealing with close to around 32 inches in areas like San Isabel, but we're also expecting to see about an additional 5 to 10 inches come from that exact same storm, causing blizzard warnings, winter storm warnings in effect widespread throughout that area. Now you head over to the front edge of this exact same storm system, sweeping over areas like Oklahoma all the way off into Texas too. Heavy storms are expected into the evening hours tonight. Now we head into central parts of Texas and even off into the west too, areas like San Angelo, with that slight risk of severe weather lasting into the afternoon hours today. But what does that mean for us? Well, in that region, especially in those flat plains, we could see tornado threat up to around 5% in that exact same area just north of San Angelo. Damaging winds are definitely possible as that storm continues to build into the overnight hours tonight, early morning hours tomorrow. And to add to that, we'll continue to keep a close eye on large hail throughout that region. Changing gears real fast, though, I do want to slide this in there. All the way over into the Tampa Bay area and south, closer to Punta Gorda and the Keys of Florida, we're seeing storms just from those outer bands of Hurricane Rafael. It's a Category 2 right now, and it's continuing to track off into the west. As we head into the next 24 hours, we'll watch it slowly decay into a Category 1 by Saturday morning. We'll have more on that coming up in just a bit. Back to you.
Well, a warning to lock your doors and windows in South Carolina. This after 40 monkeys escaped from a research facility. It's called Alpha Genesis Facility in Yamasee. It's less than an hour's drive from Savannah, Georgia. The CEO of the research facility says, "We have eyes on them. We know right where they are and can hear them. And occasionally one will come to the front and we can see them. There's no way you can catch them by chasing them," he says, "so you have to wait for them to return by their own volition." Monkey see, monkey not doing so far. Police, meanwhile, using traps and thermal imaging cameras. People who live there told if they call 911 to be sure to have a monkey to report. They don't want 911 lines jammed for anything else. Let's go to Idaho now, where attorneys for the man accused in the brutal murders of 4 university students argued to remove the death penalty for their client. You're seeing him right there, Brian Kohberger. The defense argues the death penalty violates his rights because Idaho only has lethal injection and a firing squad as execution methods, and therefore that violates the 8th Amendment's assurances against what the attorney is arguing is cruel and unusual punishment. Kohberger's trial begins summer of 2025. Let's go to the West Coast as we jump the map now to San Francisco. The prosecution rests in the trial of the man accused of killing Cash App founder Bob Lee. So lawyers for the accused, Nima Momeni, now had the opportunity to convince a jury that their client acted in self-defense. But before that, the defense stunned the courtroom as they just motioned for a mistrial. Their argument to the judge, testimony from the lead San Francisco police investigator about Momeni not able to post bond, could sway the jury. The judge denied that motion. Momeni likely to take the witness stand next week. Reportedly, he says he is eager to tell his side of the story and do it on the record and on the stand. All right, to the other side of the country, to Miami now, and reports of post-election violence. 3 women took bullets after a fight over the election. CBS News, Miami's Morgan Reiner, outside the trauma hospital where emergency crews rushed those women.
City of Miami police said that these people were having a discussion, an argument over politics when one of the individuals took the time to go into their car, grab a gun, and started shooting. That person shot 4 times, hitting 3 women. 2 of them are expected to be okay, but the 3rd woman here at the hospital is in critical condition. We know that these women are in their 20s and 30s. We did talk to a clinical psychologist here in South Florida. She said that elections, it's normal for them to induce stress and anxiety, and that although this is extreme, it is by far not the only case where elections emotions have boiled over. Now, we did see the family here at the hospital of the woman who is in critical condition. While they were not ready to speak on camera, they did tell us that they are deeply concerned. And as for the shooter right now, City of Miami police said they are still working to locate that person. At Ryder Trauma, Morgan Reiner, CBS News.
So parents, what do you think of this? Lawmakers down under working to sync social media for teens. Australia's Prime Minister will introduce legislation into Parliament this year aimed at banning social media for any child under the age of 16. His name is Anthony Albanese. He says social media causes harm to kids. Adds the law would not allow exemptions for users who have parental consent. That's it for us at CBS News 24/7. We're not going away, though. We continue to watch the White House and Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre offering first comments after the President of the United States talked about the importance of the peaceful transition of power.